Introduction. The 19th century is often remembered as a time of scientific discovery, industrial progress, and rapid modernization. But hidden beneath the shining surface of innovation was a disturbing chapter of human history, one that is rarely taught, often forgotten, and yet deeply revealing. This was the era of the human zoos, exhibitions where real people, men, women, and children, were displayed like exotic animals for public amusement and scientific understanding. Today, the phrase feels shocking and impossible, but for nearly a century, these exhibitions were not only accepted, they were wildly popular across Europe and America. They drew millions of spectators, inspired imitation shows, and shaped public ideas about race, culture, and the hierarchy of civilizations. Understanding the rise and fall of human zoos is not only about confronting the past, it is about recognizing how societies can justify inhumane acts under the disguises of science, entertainment, and curiosity.
Chapter 1. The 19th century is often remembered as a time of scientific discovery, industrial progress, and rapid modernization. But hidden beneath the shining surface of innovation was a disturbing chapter of human history, one that is rarely taught, often forgotten, and yet deeply revealing. This was the era of the human zoos, exhibitions where real people, men, women, and children, were displayed like exotic animals for public amusement and scientific understanding. Today, the phrase feels shocking and impossible, but for nearly a century, these exhibitions were not only accepted, they were wildly popular across Europe and America. They drew millions of spectators, inspired imitation shows, and shaped public ideas about race, culture, and the hierarchy of civilizations. Understanding the rise and fall of human zoos is not only about confronting the past, it is about recognizing how societies can justify inhumane acts under the disguises of science, entertainment, and curiosity.
Chapter 2. The Rise of Ethnological Exhibitions. The modern human zoo took shape in the 1870s and 1880s. This was the period of social Darwinism, a distorted interpretation of Darwin's work that suggested humanity could be ranked from primitive to advanced. Scientists, World's Fair organizers, and showmen used this ideology to justify placing indigenous peoples on display as examples of earlier or less evolved stages of human development. Carl Hagenbeck, the architect of the human zoo. German animal trader Carl Hagenbeck is widely recognized as the father of the commercial human zoo. In 1874, he organized an exhibition of Sami people from Lapland. It became so successful that he expanded the idea, bringing Nubians from Sudan, Inuit families from Greenland, and various groups from the Pacific Islands. Hagenbeck's exhibitions placed people in artificial village settings, dressed them in traditional clothing, and instructed them to perform daily tasks or rituals for the public. To him, these shows were educational. In reality, they reinforced racial stereotypes and suggested that non-European cultures existed purely for observation. Millions visited his exhibitions. Other showmen copied the model, spreading the concept across the Western world.
Chapter 3. Human Zoos at World's Fairs. World's Fairs became the ultimate stage for human exhibitions. These grand international events, designed to celebrate industrial progress, also became platforms to showcase colonies and their people. The 1889 Paris Exposition Universelle. Perhaps the most famous example was the Paris World's Fair of 1889, which introduced the world to the Eiffel Tower. Yet beyond the iron marvel stood a more controversial attraction, the Village Nègre, a recreated African settlement populated by 400 people brought from French colonies. They were displayed in huts, asked to perform dances and required to interact with visitors. The village became the fair's most visited section. Politicians and scientists claimed the exhibition proved the cultural inferiority of colonized peoples and justified French rule overseas. St. Louis World's Fair, 1904. One of the largest human zoos in history occurred at the 1904 Louisiana Purchase Exposition in St. Louis. Over 1,100 indigenous people were brought from the Philippines, Africa, and the Americas. The most disturbing display was the Igorot village, which highlighted tribal practices such as eating dog meat. Organizers used these displays to justify the U.S. colonial occupation of the Philippines by portraying Filipinos as primitive and in need of civilizing. Crowds flocked to watch rituals staged for shock value. For many visitors, this was their first encounter with people outside their own race, which meant these staged scenes shaped their lifelong worldview.
Chapter 4. Human Zoos in the Heart of Europe. While Paris and St. Louis hosted the most famous exhibitions, human zoos spread throughout Europe. Germany and the Völkerschau. In Germany, Hagenbeck's ethnographic shows, known as Völkerschau, became a national phenomenon. People from Cameroon, Samoa, Namibia, and East Africa were put on display. Posters advertised them alongside exotic animals. Scientists attended these shows to collect data, skull measurements, and photographs to support theories of racial hierarchy. Germany's rapid rise as a colonial power fueled demand for such exhibitions. They remained popular until World War I. Belgium and the Congo exhibitions. Belgium's role in human zoos was deeply connected to King Leopold II's brutal exploitation of the Congo Free State. In 1897, at the Brussels International Exposition, a Congolese village was built at the Royal Palace at Teveren. Over 260 Congolese men, women, and children were displayed in a fenced-off area. Forced to live in freezing conditions, 7 died during the exhibition. Yet more than 1.3 million visitors viewed the exhibit. For Leopold, this spectacle helped justify his control of the Congo, one of the most violent colonial regimes in history.
Chapter 5. The American Story, From Entertainment to Racial Science. In the United States, human zoos took on a unique character, merging racial segregation with scientific racism. Ota Benga, a tragic symbol. The most infamous case is Ota Benga, a young Mbuti man from the Congo who was brought to the U.S. in 1904. After being displayed at the St. Louis World's Fair, he was later placed in the Bronx Zoo in New York. There, Ota Benga was displayed in the monkey house alongside an orangutan. Crowds came to see the missing link between humans and apes, a horrifying example of how scientific racism dehumanized African peoples. Although protests from black churches eventually secured his release, Benga never recovered from the trauma. He committed suicide in 1916. His story remains one of the darkest moments in American history.
Chapter 6. Life Inside a Human Zoo. For those displayed, life was a mixture of captivity, discomfort, and humiliation. Contracts were often misleading, and many were taken by force. Conditions varied, but several common themes emerged. 1. Loss of autonomy. Participants were told how to dress, what to eat, and how to behave. Even everyday activities, cooking, playing, resting, became performances. 2.
staged, primitive behavior. Organizers forced participants to act in ways that fit European stereotypes, often exaggerating tribal practices or inventing rituals entirely. 3. Poor living conditions. Exhibits were designed for visual appeal, not comfort. Many suffered from cold climates, unfamiliar diseases, and homesickness. Deaths were not uncommon. 4. Public scrutiny and racism. Visitors frequently mocked or insulted participants. Newspapers described them in demeaning language, reinforcing racist attitudes. 5. Exploitation of children. Children were a major attraction because they created emotional engagement and curiosity. Many were brought without understanding where they were going. In every sense, human zoos robbed individuals of dignity and reduced them to objects of study and entertainment.
Chapter 7. The Decline. Changing Attitudes and Human Rights Awareness. Human zoos began to decline in the early 20th century, though they did not disappear immediately. Several factors contributed to their fall. 1. Growing criticism. Human rights activists, religious groups, and a few scientists condemned the exhibitions as unethical and degrading. The backlash began after controversies like Oda Benga's case. 2. Shifts in scientific thought. As anthropology and biology advanced, the scientific community rejected racial hierarchy theories. The idea of primitive races lost credibility. 3. Anti-colonial movements. As colonized nations fought for independence, the public began questioning the morality of empire and the exploitation it relied upon. 4. World Wars. The devastation and racial ideologies behind both world wars forced Europe and America to reconsider the consequences of dehumanizing beliefs. By the 1930s, human zoos had nearly disappeared, though small exhibitions continued into the mid-20th century in some countries. Chapter 8. Legacy. Why human zoos matter today. Human zoos are more than a historical curiosity. They reveal how easily a society can justify cruelty under the banners of science, progress, and entertainment. They show how colonialism shaped global perceptions of race, culture, and identity. Many stereotypes that persist today were shaped by these exhibitions. In recent years, museums and historians have begun acknowledging this dark past. Memorials have been built. Descendants of victims have demanded recognition and apology. Countries like Belgium, France, and Germany have begun to confront their colonial histories more honestly. The story of human zoos forces us to ask difficult questions. How does a society look away when injustice becomes spectacle? What modern practices may one day be judged just as harshly? Remembering this forgotten truth is part of ensuring such cruelty never returns in any form.